Jorge, if you're there, can you let me know? I don't see you. I need my co-host here. But when he's there, when he joins, we can.
Ci sono 28 unassigned ancora.
I'm Roberta, the technical support. Okay, I'm here.
Okay. Yes. Is Jorge here yet? So yeah, I see he was taking a picture. Well, really nice to see so many people joining this session. I will start sort of maybe saying a little bit while I wait for Jorge to join.
Hi.
Yeah. Oh, you're here. Thank you.
Sorry for the delay. I was hunting.
No worries. No worries. Shall we get started? Jorge, shall we
Okay.
get started?
Yes, please.
Yes. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so Jorge and I will be facilitating this session. Welcome to the session on the framework for equitable standardization and support of climate services. My name is Marina Baldissera Pacchetti. I'm a researcher both at the University of Leeds and at the Barcelona Supercomputing Center, and my colleague Jorge Paz, who is also co-leading the work package on the standardization in Climateurope2 is from Tecnalia, and we will be alternating roles throughout the presentation. So just let me very briefly give you an overview of what we will do. So we will start with a very brief introduction. We will tell you a little bit about our work package, its role within Climateurope2. And then the rest of the session is sort of an interactive session, or aim to be an interactive session, where we will use Mentimeter. I hope that everyone is familiar with Mentimeter, but we will explain how it works when we get there, to get to know you, to get to know what your view is, what your views are on standards and standardization processes for climate services. And then we hope to have the last part of this session just be an open discussion on standardization processes, but also importantly on a topic that we really need to start thinking about, which is what, if anything, should not be standardized. So this is kind of broadly what we will be doing, and hopefully you can see on the screen the timings that we have set for each of these parts. Okay, so let me start with the introduction. This has been mentioned yesterday as well, but I think it's actually quite timely that the IPCC press conference at the release of the synthesis report for summary for policymakers was really thinking about, supporting climate action, supporting mitigation and adaptation, and how we can get there, right? So here are some of the quotes from both the chair and of the IPCC, but also the panelists that were there, that I think struck out to me and I think are particularly relevant for the work that we're doing here. So the first one is that the response to climate change, both mitigation and adaptation, needs to lead to a safer, more equitable future for all. So here, the word that I would like you to pay attention to is this equitable, this word equitable. So this is a word that is also embedded in our project, and in particular also in our work package, right? So we want to support an equitable community, but like Asun Lera-Saint-Clair was explaining yesterday during the panel, it is also important that standardization processes can lead to are equitable, so that we can have an equitable so that the standards can also support an equitable community. Then another thing that was said was that trust, collaboration, and sharing of resources and benefits is absolutely necessary to get there, to get to this better future. And again, like what this community support action wants to do is to create trust, collaboration, and sharing of resources. So this is particularly relevant to the work that we're doing here in Climate Europe 2. And finally, another really important quote is that technology alone will not take us there, right? So we only need institutions and policy to facilitate this transition and moving to the safer, more equitable future for all. And perhaps one extra thing that I would like to add to this is that not only we will need to pay attention to institutions and policy, but we really need to create a community that is able to be inclusive, not only of differences in terms of, like, for example, power differentials, but also our climate community needs to be inclusive of many different kinds of disciplines. And like Paco was showing yesterday, we really have in Climate Europe 2 a very diverse community in terms of the kinds of expertise that we bring to the table. So we really need to think about from maybe an academic community perspective, but this can be translated to broader communities, right? Not just the climate science, but also the social sciences and the humanities, right? And I think, like Kirsten Dunlap was saying yesterday, we really need to connect the sciences and the arts very importantly. So just to give you an idea, so like the showing you this image again of how Climate Europe 2 is structured, that so we are supporting the community, but like the aim is also to increase the uptake of climate services and to partly do so through standards and standardization processes. And this is where work package 1 comes in as a work package that works together with work packages 2, 3, 4, and 5, but also 6 and 7 to bring together all the insights from the community to think about how and what can and should be standardized, but also how and what shouldn't be standardized and why. And this is a little bit what we want to ask or open the discussion to you today as well, in order to get the insights from the broader community, since we've started having this discussion within Climate Europe 2, within the consortium, but we definitely want to hear from the broader community as well. Jorge, over to you.
Thank you, Marina. Now, I would like to present how we are going to contribute to these objectives from the work package 1, from the work that we are doing in work package 1. First, regarding the first objective of developing a standardization procedure for climate services, of course, at the end of the project in task 1.4, we are going to generate a set of agreements, standard recommendation and strategies that will be, let's say, the final outcome of the projects. But these outcomes will be possible thanks to the development of a landscape of the current initiatives and the current standards that can be of interest, that are of interest for the climate services community, and a gap analysis of the opportunities that we find into this landscape. And considering this analysis, we will propose a framework for the equitable standardization of climate services, or for those components of the climate services that are mature enough for being standardized. Regarding the second objective of supporting an equitable European climate service community, we have in mind the research question that is on the screen: how can we ensure equitability in standards and in the standardization processes? In the framework, let's say, of the formal standardization, equitability is in some way a critical point, and the processes that are being implemented for defining an ISO or a standard look for this equitable participation and equitable standardization process. And we want to, in some way, considering also the different particularities of climate services, ensure this equitability and bring all the people in. And we will develop a strategy to support climate services and to identify good practices and standards that can be standardized. And in relation to the objective number 3 of Climateurope2, enhancing a take of the quality assured climate services to support adaptation and mitigation. Of course, we are aiming to support accreditation strategy of climate services. I'm not sure now if we are going to reach that far, if we are going to create something like a label or a standard of full accreditation in some way, but this is in mind, and this is let's say the final objective in some way, and also to provide requirement to assure credibility and legitimacy for the climate services tools. We are also finding that in some way some standards are demanding climate services. Some standards in different sectors are in some way also can be used for the marketing and for the business model of the standards, for the business model of the different climate services. And moving to the next slide, please, Marina. This is a view of the main outcomes that we are creating in the framework of the Work Package 1. The first one is the landscape. As I was saying, it tries to clarify the system landscape of technical procedures, norms, and standards that are of interest for climate services. The first version is done, but as the project evolves, we will update this landscape and collect the information coming from other work packages, reflecting the good practices, the different procedures, etc., that are in the different topics that are addressing the other work packages, the data and processes in work package 2, the business in work package 3, marketing in work package 4, and policy in work package 5. We will in some way collect all the information and update this landscape. We are also creating a glossary. As Marina said, this is a very interdisciplinary project, and we in some way need it for this iterative process. And we have also, let's say, some kind of also a specific vocabulary or glossary for each of the work packages. We will create this framework that is in some way the roadmap for standardizing climate services. That is one of the ongoing activities with the glossary. And in the final part that we haven't started yet, we will proceed to the generation of agreements. Agreements are let's say the mechanisms that we already have in mind for standardizing some components of the climate services, but also recommendation strategies, etc. In the bottom, we see the periodic synthesis report. That is how we will interact with the different work packages for the styling information from the work package 2 to 5, and channeling that knowledge into the standardization activities. Moving to the next one, in this slide, we try to represent this iterative process between work package 1 and the work package 2 to 5, where we in some way will create an initial basis of knowledge, and that we hope to be useful for these work packages, and in some way iterate acquiring all the knowledge that is being analyzed in work package 2 to 5. And in the final part, moving quickly to the bottom, but it's not going to be so fast. We will create the the same words of agreement on other mechanisms for the mature components, and for other components, maybe we can only reach some kind of recommendation or a map of planet activities, etc. So this is a brief presentation of the work package 1. Now I give the floor to Mariana for continuing with the iterative part of the session.
Yes, thanks, Jorge. Before we move on, does anyone have any questions on what we have so far? Like anything that wasn't clear, any clarificatory question? Is there anything you might want to know something more about? We have a few minutes to dedicate to that, and you can raise your hand if you do. But if not, we can move on to the more interactive part. And again, like, I just want to emphasize that, yes, if at any point anything that we're saying or doing is unclear, please do feel free to raise the hand and ask the question, or put the question in the chat. That's fine too. Like, between Jorge and myself, whoever is not speaking at the moment, the other one is monitoring the chat. So please do feel free to type in the chat as well. Okay, so the aims of this second part, as I was saying, it's like to collect insights from the audience on how standards and standardization can support climate services. We are having this discussion within our consortium, but obviously we do want to open it up to the community, and that is what we hope to start in this session on standards and standardization. And we also want to get a feel for what you think instead should not be standardized, right? So after discussing a little bit about what standards are, what standardization processes are, we want to also ask you a little bit about that. And at that point, we will stop sharing the screen and just like open for discussion. Okay, so we will use Mentimeter. Hopefully you are familiar with that, but if not, let me just very briefly explain how it works. So you can use your phone, you can use your laptop. If you use your phone, you can scan the QR code, and it will take you to the website, where you will see the slides pop up as we go. If you're using it on your phone, you can open your browser and go to menti.com and put in this code. I see. I opened the reactions. That's the first time I'm using that, so that's great that it works. Thank you for giving me the thumbs up. Yes, and so we will go relatively quickly through the first couple of questions, and then we will stop and have a bit of a discussion. That's wonderful. Okay, thank you. Okay, so the first set of questions is about getting to know you, so your background and what your familiarity is with standards and standardization processes. So here we're asking you to share with us your professional background. This is the same list that you got when registering to the session. So yes, I'll wait. Yes, the code on Menti, it's this one. Thanks, Jorge. You already did that. That's perfect.
I'm not sure if we have a chat for all the breakout groups.
We do. This is the meeting. This is the chat for the breakout groups.
Okay. Okay.
Yes. So, why is voting closed? It should still be open. So we have 27 that participated so far. We have 50 participants in this chat. So I'll wait maybe another minute. But yes, I think this is great to see that, like, we have lots of academics, but not not just academics. So this is great, and we are also really interested in hearing the perspective of those that are not academics. Okay, so let's pass to the next slide. Again, this is to ask you about what your background knowledge is on standards and standardization. You have 4 different options. One, it's like whether you're completely new to this topic, whether you have some knowledge, like you've read about it, you have thought about it, you've been involved in something but have no direct experience. If you have some direct experience but it's not your main area, or if it's exactly your area of work. Yeah. And I hear someone has some background noise. If you could mute, that would be great. It was you, Jorge. Thanks. Great. And again, it's really nice to see that there is a diversity of views. So that will hopefully also be a good discussion later. I'll give it a few more seconds. Okay.
I think that's great. I think it's difficult to say that I work in standards. It's something that is complicated to define what that means. But I see that in some way we have people with different degrees of involvement in this.
Yeah. Sorry. Is it open now? I see that some people are saying that voting is closed. Oh, it's working now. Thank you. Yeah, I think if I press C, it closes the voting. So please, yes, please do let me know. And yeah, I think by trying to copy and paste the code, I accidentally closed the voting. But that's great. Again, like we have a pretty diverse group of people, which is great. And yeah, Jorge, I think you count as working in standards and standardization. I would think.
Yes, yeah. I think I can consider that I've been working in standards because I have contributed to developing different standards.
Yeah.
And that is in some way I think that always works with a kind of with any kind of rules, standards, procedures that are defined in our areas of expertise. But it's just to say that I think that we can understand the question and the answers at a different degree of involvement, and we admit that most of the participants consider standards important for the work.
That's great. So we can pass on to the next question, I think. So the next questions are open-ended, so you will see that you will be able to get a bit of you will be able to include some text instead of just selecting an option. And so we might need a little bit more time for this. And we want to ask first, what are standards to you? Like, what are they? What do they do? Like, we will think a little bit more about what standards can achieve for climate services later on. But first, we want to get an idea of like what this audience thinks of standards. And again, if you have any questions about the questions or what we're asking, please feel free to raise. And it might take a while for the page to refresh itself. Okay, the link I shared should take you to the page where you can sign in, type in. Okay, we have some very interesting insights coming in. They are a model, they are directives. They, I suppose, ensure interoperability and quality assurance. They can provide common terminology, help with comparative evaluations. That's important. System that facilitates works and increases reliability. I'm gonna scroll down so you can all read. For data consistent naming conventions and for variables and file formats. Facilitate search and interoperability. Yes, this is also what a lot of what Work Package 2 is doing, which is great. Ensuring high quality and trust for users, quality control measures, common norms and nomenclature, a set of conditions that establish a framework so that anybody works and plays within the same conditions. Yes, that's interesting.
I think that the answers are very diverse, and in some way they are pointing to different kind of standards. No, I think that these answers reflect that we have in mind different kind of standards. Some of them are, I remember, regarding terminology, another are pointing to a framework, other for interoperability, or more specific on data, metadata, data, formats, etc. And this is in some way the challenge that we have ahead, the idea of identifying where are the gaps and where are the different kind of, from the different approaches that we can implement in the standards, what are the most suitable standards for each of the activities that we can standardize in climate services. I think this very diverse set of answers reflects in some way the diverse set of standards that we can implement in the project.
Yes, yes, thanks, Jorge. I agree. And like, I think it's also an interesting thing that comes up is that, yes, it has some specific outcomes, but it is also something that is normative, right? It sets some rules of fair play, or like rules of the game, or rules for working within the climate service community. So it has also this strong normative element. And one of the things that we also were talking about is like, how can we understand standards also as a form of governance for climate services? There's one way in which, we can set rules and regulate the climate service community. Okay, I'm going to go to the next question. We have a few more, and then we will just open for discussion. The next question asks about standardization processes. What is the standardization process to you? And this is something that emerged a lot in our discussions in Climate Europe too, that like we can't just be thinking about standards, we also really need to think about how we get there. And that's why we wanted to also ask you what you think is a standardization process in this context. And let me put the link again so that you can access this slide easily here. Oh, it's the same, so that works. Okay, we have some answers starting to come in. Thank you. Yeah, some interesting simple, like in individual words, like simple, guided, and inclusive. These are interesting. Co-designed, co-developed, and co-evaluated, working across this climate service community. That also talks to the inclusivity part. I'm gonna start scrolling down. A common framework, steps and rules for what are the standards, how to apply them. Mandated, that's interesting. I'm interested in knowing mandated by whom. Consensus-based iterations, a consensus process among different stakeholders. Lots of interesting answers, thank you. Community agreement of what should be standardized. People work on the fine detail of how a standard should be implemented, quality control to ensure standards are met. Way of organizing work in order to achieve fairness. Like for anyone that doesn't know, the FAIR principles are principles for data, fair data management. I don't remember exactly what those stand for. If anyone knows, remembers them, please, you can put them in the chat. Creating and deciding standards through the discussion of the requirements by experts and users. A process that includes periodic renewal. So interesting. Jorge, do you have any?
Yes, I would like to comment on the several comments and ideas. Several of the answers are insisting on this idea of mandatory rules, some way of making them some way obligatory, let's say, and that's very interesting for me. Most of the comments I think that are very, let's say, focusing on the process itself of being a consensus, being an evolving. I have find different comments that is this one that is now on the screen, insisting on the renewal of the update, and I totally agree with that idea. I have seen different in that line, because climate services are evolving, and of course I don't know in which way we can just make a fixed standard or something. That in most of the activities I think that should be open and to innovation and to evolve. And inclusivity and of the inclusion of all the partners, I think that there are the consensus, etc. There are part of several of the comments I have to say. And this is very interesting for me. Of course, there are all the comments are very interesting for me, but this is our maybe the main comments I can do today.
Yeah.
The answers.
Yeah, and just to pick up on what you were saying about you know, like this sort of iterativeness, that's also something that we have been discussing in Climate Europe 2 within the consortium, and maybe could be part of the discussion in a minute when we open up about you know, some of the concerns is like how, you know, how can we understand standards as something that doesn't stifle innovation, right? Is a standard something that sets a rigid way of doing things, or can it evolve? And as Jorge was saying, and like, you know, and as is practice, you know, these standards are revised through standardization processes and can be renewed at various stages as the landscape and the community and the sector evolves. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions or comments at this point, or otherwise I'll pass on to the next question, which is, I think, the penultimate. Roger, yes, please. Do you have a comment?
Thanks very much. I thought your point on not stifling innovation is a very, very important one, because those of us I have been involved in writing some standards, and almost as they were published, they were out of date. And I think that's what we have to remember is that we shouldn't stifle innovation. The other thing we shouldn't is the necessity that it enable development of climate services, because we're not all starting, and we will never all be starting at the same level. There will be people that are further ahead, but also people that are just starting out and starting out using, but also starting out producing. And you don't want to prevent them or stifle them from getting on the ladder, if you think of a common term. So a standard has to be able to deal with both of those aspects. And I thought that was very important. So I just wanted to, at least in my mind, I wanted to reiterate that point, that it's a way of inspiring, it's a way of enabling the development of climate services that are able to meet the broader needs, which are always changing, and capabilities, which are always changing, so that we can make sure that people that are using climate services are able to understand that they're getting the highest quality that is available to them, and knowing that the people they're working with are trustworthy and all those other things. So I just wanted to reiterate that point. Thank you.
Thanks, Roger. And hopefully we can have a broader discussion on that. But Nieves, if you have a quick remark, and then we will do one more question, and then we will open to everyone. But yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I think that it was a very nice point, and from Roger. And indeed, what I wanted to ask you, Marina, and Jorge, is about your view about the benefits of standards from the point of view of the producers or from the point of view of the users. Because I have this doubt, and I think that I agree very much with these different levels of maturity at both sides, at the producer sides, but especially on the users. And I would like to ask you, from your experience on Climateurope2, your thoughts on this. Are the standards being more useful for the producer side or from the user side? Thank you.
Thanks, Nieves. That's a very good and very difficult question, I think. And Jorge maybe has something to do, but I think that for me, like, part of it is like the aim of the standards, and that's the kind of next question that we're gonna ask, like, who do standards benefit? But that's definitely something that we are taking into consideration. And yes, Jorge, go ahead if you have something.
First, I have to say sorry, but because there is some noise here. But if regarding this question, I think that from both sides, I think that in the open session that we have yesterday, we all are pointing to more interoperable standards, more more interoperable climate services, more systemic climate services, more. I detected a great ambition on what climate services should be and could be, and this increasing complexity maybe requires more players, and from that side, I say let me consider myself part of the climate service community now. I think that from that side, that could be user for the producers, let's say, in some way, considering how the climate services are evolving and how we envision the evolution of climate services. So this is in some way, and very briefly, my vision and how this can contribute to the producers, or let's say to the climate service industry in some way. But on the other hand, the users, and we are and this is one of the objectives of Climateurope2, is not only to standardize, but also to promote climate services, to increase the uptake of climate services. And the market is for the marketing and for the market, if we can ensure quality or reflect the quality through a standard, that it will help for the business part of the climate services, for the market, for the applicability in the policy. That is also a clear advantage. So I have to say that from both perspectives, we hope to contribute in Climateurope2.
Yes, thanks. Thanks, Jorge. And I think that sort of also fits or leads nicely into our next question, which is and some people have already answered, and like please continue. So what do you think are the benefits of standards and standardization from climate services? And here we have adopted a list that has been adopted and modified, a list that had been developed by JBA Consulting together with their partners working for standards for climate services in the UK as part of the UK Climate Resilience Programme. So we started from their work to think about what are the benefits of standards for climate services, and we would like, yes, to ask you to rank them. And I think this particular list of things, thinking about Nieves's question is thinking about what are the benefits for the users rather than for the climate service community itself. But like we have a question coming next if you think that there are any other benefits that are not in this list. So if you think that there are some that are particular for the climate service community itself, always taking into consideration the fact that the climate service community and the users are part of this community, and the sort of distinctions between providers and climate service developers and users is not always so distinct. So maybe sometimes it's really hard to disentangle exactly the target of these benefits. But I can see that the list is staying pretty much a little bit the way that it was at the beginning. Maybe I put in some bias. Jorge, did you have something to say?
No, I think that this reflects the previous question also. The main benefit is confidence and trust in climate services. So I think that is what we expect in some way, but it's nice to see that. And the benchmark and the quality is there. I think that there is a debate in the interventions and the question that we have received about how what we define the highest level of quality, the minimum level of quality. This is an ongoing debate, and something that we have to solve and think about it during this project and these years. And of course, transparency, that is something that I think is one of the main outcomes of the standards that we have already detected in the specific fields of let's say the internal system standard for climate services. This idea of provenance and documenting the steps behind the climate services, and I think it's more or less what we expect and what is reflected in the previous answers. I don't know if.
Yeah, just a super brief comment. Yeah, the reason that we're putting benchmark and quality together is exactly because, yes, within Climateurope2 so far, we've had these discussions about how do we think about quality and standards? And there seems to emerge this consensus about the fact that, you know, we shouldn't set standards that are so high that they are exclusive, right? They need to provide a minimum level of quality and acceptability, and then anyone can, you know, exceed it. That's kind of the way that we have been thinking about minimum level of quality, or another word that has been used because even the term quality has been questioned is adequacy for purpose. So like, what is an adequate climate service, right? And that's still asking the same question, what is good enough? But that's the kind of discussion that we're having. And yeah, in the interest of time, I do want to leave at least 10 minutes just to have an open discussion. But yeah, just very briefly, are there any other expected outcomes of standardization of climate services that aren't in that list that you think are important and that we should take into consideration? Yeah, we can have a minute on that, and then I will stop sharing and open the floor for discussion. Good to see that those were the expected outcome. It's useful to know that if you think that there's none, that's also helpful. So thank you. Oh, it's nice to see that there are some. I see that there is a question. I'm not sure I understand it. Like, if whoever wrote it would like to, if it's not a question, then it doesn't matter. But if you would like to ask a clarificatory question, or whether you're asking a broader question, please feel free to speak up or put it in the chat. Yeah, easy rollout of successful services, flexibility to combine data in new ways and suit the evolving needs of climate service users. Could favor collaboration. That's an interesting one. Yeah, maybe having climate services be more user-oriented, if that's the sort of a normative standards that comes out of, like, how, you know, a process standard for climate service and user engagement. That's an interesting one. Easy to use. Interconnection with climate risk assessment standards. Yes, that's an important one. And I'm really looking forward to hearing about Climax tomorrow.
Yes. I find interesting also the idea of the market oriented. I think there is something, let's say, I totally agree. First, I have to say, in the easy to use, that two of the comments are insisting on that. I think that the standards should be easy, even despite we are trying to standardize a very complex activity. We have to target this easiness, and in some way, and in some activities, I think we can in some way deliver a result. No, not in others, but in other, what the users of the standards are expecting is very clear procedures. But I find part of particular interest the part related to the market and the business that is very, very in some way complex of define. I have to say that part of the analysis that we are doing is reflecting that some standards are demanding climate data, some activity, a lot of activities of our life are regulated by standards, and the connection between standards and climate data and climate services is becoming more obvious, I think. And in some way, I think that the standards are also pulling from are pulling the market in some way. Is something that we can focus also on, that pull strategy for the market, and using the standards or the existing standards that are related to climate change adaptation to the sectors where climate information is critical, etc. To link this to climate services. This is something that we are in some way exploring in the project.
Yeah, thanks, Jorge. And I think the market also raises like some interesting questions about whether standards are always appropriate, right? Like, so picking back up on like what Roger was saying, about, not stifling innovation, that's this sort of question. That's I think, to me at least, the first thing that like makes me think about what it really means, to standardize and what should not be standardized. So now we really want to hear from you. I'll stop sharing the screen, and like, yeah, if you have some comments, or like if you would like to say or something about what we should be thinking about when we don't want to standardize. So yeah, please feel free to put on your cameras, raise your hand, and comment. I see Charlotte has already put a comment in the chat. I see a tension between relaxed standards to facilitate inclusivity of data inputs and strong standards to facilitate flexibility of data outputs. That's interesting. I wonder if you could elaborate on that, Charlotte, if you can.
Hi. Yeah, so standards, if all the data, for instance, climate model output, if the climate model output completely follows the standards that have been put in place for it, then you can combine it in new ways. You have the flexibility when writing tools and services that sit on top of that. But if it doesn't properly follow the standards, then you don't have that flexibility. So I think it depends what you want to do with the data. If you want to include it in something that allows you to have the flexibility to go, I need a new climate indice, how can I calculate that? Then if the data that's sitting in your climate data store, for instance, is all properly following the standards that it should, then you can have a wider choice of input data to go into your tools.
Yeah, thank you. That's super interesting. Jorge, did you want to say something?
Yes, I don't know if I have understood completely the point, but I agree. In some way when we are working on climate services, we are very depending on the availability and the previous steps, let's say, in the business in the business chain and in the elaboration chain. I think that I agree in this tension and this equilibrium that we have to find in some way. I totally agree, and I think that what we are trying to do in Climateurope2 in some way is to build this processing chain or business model chain, etc., or let's call it in different ways, and try to see how in the different stages we can contribute from the standardization, because I understand that if we only fix standards for the final part and you don't have standards for the previous steps or the previous components, as we call, then the situation is going to be very complicated for the people at the end of the near the final customer, final user, let's say. So I try to create these value chains in some way and see see how we can focus on different on the different components we are covering. But thank you. I totally agree. The tension is there, and we have to address it.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, that's kind of like the picking up on what Jorge was saying about thinking about all the different steps and components of climate services. Like that's kind of what we're trying to do in work package 1 of Climateurope2. So all the other work packages are looking at climate services through very particular lenses, like the data lens, the business lens, the policy lens, the market lens. And what we are trying to do is like have this broad overview of all these different lenses to try and harmonize these tensions, right? And make sure that best practices, or if they are developed standards for some components, are not becoming a barrier to other parts of the climate services. And I think, you know, an important point you raised is about, you know, purpose and what you use these different services for. That's, I think, also a very big challenge in the context of like thinking about these normative aspects of climate services, because yes, you always have to negotiate between, you know, yes, being rigid enough to be able to say something useful, but also not hindering important, you know, like innovation, like, you know, or applications or what have you. And that's kind of why we were posing this question to you about, you know, what should we not standardize? Is there something that like maybe needs something else, like best practices? Philip, do you you're raising your hand? Please feel unmute and
you maybe start the video not so easy. Yes, I would like to, maybe just because you mentioned the purpose now, that was something that came to my mind while I was listening to the presentation and doing the Mentimeter thing, that I was missing a bit some clear definition of the purpose, but at the same time I see that it is probably very difficult, because climate services, if I hear climate services, I think everybody in this panel will have a slightly different idea on what climate services are. That's a very wide field, from, I don't know, real-time operational support to climate impact studies to climate adaptations services and whatever. So I think that any standardization would probably need to make the purpose quite clear. I'm personally not so sure if there can be one standard for climate services in general, but maybe you can have a comment or a comment on this issue.
Yeah, so we have 1 minute, so I will just very quickly. Yes, that's super important, and thanks for making that comment. Like, yeah, so what we're trying to do is basically break up climate services into the different components. We have tried thinking about the different purposes, but have like come a bit at a roadblock. I think like as the other work packages like progress with their work, we will maybe be able to have a little bit more data on that and like think a little bit about how we can partition the purposes in a way that like actually makes sense. But yeah, that's something that we're struggling with, and like something that we're actually really considering. But we're definitely not thinking about one big standard for climate services. We are thinking about different processes, different data product, different types of engagement activities, and then within that more, let's call it like fragmented view of climate services, we will be thinking about, you know, what is mature in that context, what can be standardized in that context, and how it fits with the rest of the value chain, with the rest of the climate service ecosystem, let's call it that way, and whether that makes sense as a whole. That's kind of our role as work package 1, like always like taking dives and then taking steps back and make sure that there is a coherence at the large scale. So yeah, thank you for coming, and maybe see you